On a red-eye flight from New York to London, a single father slept in seat 8A. To everyone around him, he was just another exhausted passenger who hadn't slept enough in days. Then the captain's voice cut through the cabin, urgent and unlike any routine announcement. If there are any combat pilots on board, please identify yourself immediately. The cabin froze. No one moved. The man in seat 8A opened his eyes and understood that the past he had buried to protect his daughter was calling his name. Why would a single dad be the one an entire flight was waiting for? 3 hours earlier, Ethan Cole had boarded Air Atlantic Flight 447 with nothing but a carry-on bag and the kind of exhaustion that comes from being both father and foundation to a 7-year-old girl. He found seat 8A without looking at anyone, slid into the aisle seat, and let his head fall back against the headrest. The young man beside him wore headphones and didn't look up. That suited Ethan fine. He wasn't looking for conversation. He was looking for sleep. The flight attendants moved through their safety demonstration, while Ethan closed his eyes. He had made this trip twice a year since taking the software engineering job in Portland. Flying to New York for client meetings, he could have handled over video calls. But the company insisted on FaceTime, and Ethan needed the paycheck more than he needed to argue. So he took the red eyes, slept when he could, and got home to Emma as fast as possible. Sleep came quickly. The hum of the engines became white noise, and the cabin lights dimmed, and Ethan Cole disappeared into dreams he would rather not have. In the dream, he was back in the cockpit of an F-16, the sky around him dark except for the glow of his instruments. His call sign crackled through the headset. Falcon. They had given him that name during his second year of flight school, back when he still believed he would do this forever. The stick felt right in his hands, the way it always had, like an extension of his own body. Then Emma's voice cut through the radio static, small and worried. "Daddy, are you coming home?" The cockpit dissolved. He was standing in their living room in Portland, still wearing his flight suit, and Emma stood in the doorway in her pajamas. She was 4 years old in this memory. It was the night he had told her he was leaving the Air Force. "I'm coming home, sweetheart," he had said. "And I'm staying home." Emma had looked at him with those wide, serious eyes. "Promise?" "I promise." He woke to the sound of the captain's voice, not the calm, rehearsed tone of standard announcements. This was clipped, tight, the kind of voice that makes people sit up straighter. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Ross. We are experiencing a technical situation that requires immediate attention. If there are any military pilots on board, particularly fighter pilots with experience in manual flight under extreme conditions, please identify yourself to a flight attendant immediately." Around him, passengers were looking at each other, murmuring. The young man next to him pulled off his headphones and leaned toward the aisle, craning to see if anyone was standing. No one was. The murmurs grew louder. Someone 3 rows back said, "What kind of technical situation?" Ethan sat very still. He knew what that announcement meant. He had heard enough emergency calls in his 12 years of service to recognize the controlled panic underneath the captain's words. This was not a drill. This was the kind of request you only make when something has gone very, very wrong. His first thought was, Emma. She was home with Mrs. Kowalski, the neighbor who watched her when he traveled. She would be asleep by now, her nightlight casting soft shadows on the wall, her stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm. If this plane went down, she would wake up tomorrow and find out her father was gone. His second thought was that he could help. 12 years flying F-16s, hundreds of hours in conditions that would ground commercial pilots. He had landed on aircraft carriers in storms, navigated equipment failures at 30,000 feet, brought damaged birds home when everyone on the radio told him to eject. He was trained for chaos. His third thought was the promise, the one he had made to Emma the day he hung up his uniform. No more risks, no more deployments, No more nights when she had to wonder if he was coming home. He had walked away from all of that to be the father she needed. Steady, present, safe. But if he did nothing now, there would be no coming home at all. The cabin was getting louder. A woman in the row ahead was crying softly. A man's voice rose above the others, demanding to know what was happening. Ethan heard the sharp click of seatbelts being unfastened, people shifting in their seats, panic starting to spread like a living thing. A flight attendant appeared at the front of the cabin. She was tall, maybe in her early 40s, with dark hair pulled back in a tight bun and the kind of calm, professional expression that comes from years of handling turbulence and crying babies and drunk passengers. Her name tag read, Claire Bennett. "Please remain calm and stay in your seats," Claire said. Her tone was firm but not unkind. "We are following all safety protocols. If anyone has military flight experience, please make yourself known now." She moved down the aisle slowly, making eye contact with passengers, waiting. Ethan watched her. She stopped at row 5, row 6, row 7. When she reached row 8, her gaze landed on him. For a moment, they just looked at each other. Then she moved on. In his mind, he saw 2 images side by side. Emma asleep in her bed. Emma at a funeral, too young to understand why her father was never coming back. He stood up. Claire turned immediately. The passengers nearby went quiet, watching. Ethan stepped into the aisle and moved toward her. "I was a fighter pilot," he said quietly. "F-16s. 12 years. Claire's gaze swept over him. He knew what she was seeing. A man in a wrinkled hoodie and jeans, unshaven, dark circles under his eyes. No uniform, no credentials. Nothing to prove he was anything other than a tired passenger who maybe watched too many movies. "You're saying you're military?" she asked, her tone neutral. "I was," Ethan said. "I retired 3 years ago." "Do you have any identification? Anything that proves your service?" Ethan shook his head. "I didn't bring my military ID. I haven't carried it since I got out." "Sir, I need you to understand something. If you're not who you say you are, if you're panicking or confused or trying to help in a way that makes things worse, people could die. Do you understand that?" "I do," Ethan said. "And I'm telling you the truth. I flew F-16s for 12 years. I know what I'm doing." Before Claire could respond, a voice came from behind Ethan. "Let me talk to him." A man stood up from seat 9C, broad-shouldered and gray-haired, with the kind of posture that never fully leaves someone who spent time in uniform. "I'm Marcus Webb," the man said. "Former Army. Did some joint ops with Air Force pilots back in the day." He crossed his arms. "If you're legit, you'll be able to answer a few questions." Marcus didn't waste time. "What fighter did you fly?" "F-16 Viper." "How many flight hours?" "Just over 2,000. "What squadron?" 56th Fighter Wing, Luke Air Force Base." "Tell me 3 emergency procedures for hydraulic failure." Ethan's answer came without hesitation. "Activate the emergency power unit. Switch to manual reversion mode. If both systems fail, use differential thrust from the engines to maintain directional control." Marcus studied him for a long moment. Then he turned to Claire. "He knows what he's talking about. That's not something you learn from Google." Claire looked between them, weighing risk against risk, doubt against desperation. Finally, she nodded once, sharp and decisive. "Come with me," she said. Ethan followed her toward the front of the plane. The other passengers watched in silence. He heard whispers starting up behind him, speculation and fear blending together. Someone asked if he was really a pilot. A child's voice asked, "Mommy, is the plane going to crash?" As they approached the cockpit door, Claire stopped and turned to face him. "I'm taking you up there because we don't have another option," she said quietly. "But if you do anything, and I mean anything, that puts this flight in more danger, I will remove you myself." "Understood?" "Understood," Ethan said. Claire knocked twice on the cockpit door, then pressed the intercom. "It's Claire. I'm bringing someone in." The door unlocked with a soft click. Claire pushed it open and stepped inside. Ethan followed. The cockpit was small, cramped, lit by the glow of dozens of instruments and screens. Captain Ross sat in the left seat, slumped slightly to one side, his face pale and sheened with sweat. A woman in a white coat knelt beside him, checking his pulse. "Dr. Sarah Morrison," she said quickly. "He's had a stroke. Mild, I think, but he can't fly." In the right seat, First Officer Miller gripped the controls with both hands. He was younger than Ethan had expected, maybe late 20s, and his knuckles were white against the yoke. When he glanced back, Ethan saw fear in his expression, poorly hidden. "Who's this?" Miller asked. "He says he's a fighter pilot," Claire said. "Former Air Force." Miller's gaze snapped to Ethan. "Can you fly this?" Ethan stepped closer, already scanning the instrument panel. Warning lights blinked in a pattern he recognized. The autopilot display showed a red X. The hydraulic pressure gauges were dropping. He could feel the slight yaw in the plane's attitude, the way Miller was compensating with manual inputs. "Your fly-by-wire system failed," Ethan said. "You're in manual reversion mode." Miller's eyes widened. "How did you know that?" "Bank angle is 0.23 degrees off-center. Airspeed is down 8 knots from optimal. You're correcting by hand." Ethan looked at the hydraulic indicators. "And you're losing pressure in both systems. How long has it been like this?" "About 10 minutes, Miller said. His voice cracked slightly. "I've got maybe 800 flight hours total. I've never dealt with anything like this." Ethan moved to stand between the two seats, reading the situation the way he had been trained to read combat scenarios. Fast, clinical, without emotion. "You're doing fine," he said. "But you're going to need help. How much fuel do you have?" Miller checked the gauge. "Enough to make London." "Barely." Ethan shook his head. "You won't make London. Not with hydraulic failure. You need to divert to the nearest airport with emergency services." "Shannon," Miller said immediately. "Shannon Airport in Ireland. It's about 200 miles out." "That's your best option," Ethan said. "But you're going to need to let me help you get there." Claire stepped forward. "You're sure you can do this?" Ethan turned to look at her. For the first time since waking up, he felt the fear loosen its grip just slightly. Not because the situation was less dangerous, but because he knew this feeling. He had lived in this space before, where everything came down to training and instinct, and the willingness to trust yourself when there was no other choice. "I can do this," he said. Claire held his gaze for 3 long seconds. Then she stepped back. "Do it." Ethan moved to the jump seat behind Miller and sat down. Through the windscreen, he could see nothing but darkness and the faint glow of stars. Somewhere far below, the Atlantic Ocean stretched out in all directions, black and endless. Somewhere far behind, Emma was asleep. Safe, unaware that her father had just broken his promise. He pushed the thought away and focused on the instruments. There would be time for guilt later. Right now, 189 people needed him to remember who he used to be. "All right," Ethan said. "Let's get everyone home." Miller reached for the radio, his hand fumbling the switch twice before he got it. "Shannon Tower, this is Air Atlantic 447. We are declaring an emergency, requesting immediate clearance for priority landing." The response came back within seconds, calm and professional. "Air Atlantic 447, Shannon Tower. We copy your emergency. What is the nature of your situation?" Miller glanced at Ethan. Ethan took over. "Shannon, we have dual hydraulic system failure, and our captain is incapacitated. We are operating under manual reversion. We need crash and rescue standing by." There was the briefest hesitation on the other end. Then the controller's voice came back, tighter now but still controlled. 447, understood. We are clearing all traffic. Runway 10 is yours. Emergency services are moving into position. What is your current position and altitude? Ethan read off the coordinates from the navigation display. We're approximately 190 miles west-northwest of your position. Flight level 370. We'll need to start our descent soon. Copy that. 447. We'll guide you in. How many souls on board? 189 passengers, 6 crew. Understood. We're ready for you. Miller set the radio down. What do we do now? Now we start bringing her down, Ethan said. Slowly. We can't afford any sharp movements with the hydraulics this compromised. Every input has to be smooth and deliberate. Behind them, Dr. Morrison was still kneeling beside Captain Ross. She looked up. He's stable for now, but he needs a hospital, soon. We're working on it, Ethan said. He turned his attention back to the instrument panel. The hydraulic pressure gauges showed both systems continuing to drop. They were running on fumes and backup reserves. He did the math in his head. Based on the current rate of decline, they had maybe 35 to 40 minutes before total system failure. Claire appeared in the doorway. The passengers are getting restless. They want to know what's happening. Tell them the truth, Ethan said without looking away from the instruments. We're diverting to Shannon. We'll be on the ground in under an hour. Tell them to stay calm and follow instructions. Claire studied him for a moment. Will we make it? Ethan met her gaze. Yes. He said it with more certainty than he felt, but Claire seemed to accept it. She nodded and disappeared back into the cabin. Miller began the descent, easing the nose down by fractions of a degree. The plane responded sluggishly, fighting him. Ethan watched the instruments, calling out adjustments. You're dropping too fast. Pull back half a degree, Miller corrected. The descent rate smoothed out. Good. Hold that. Keep your airspeed steady. They worked in silence for several minutes, Miller making inputs while Ethan monitored the results. It was a delicate balance, trying to bring the massive aircraft down without overloading the failing hydraulic systems. One wrong move, and they could lose what little control they had left. Then the plane shuddered. A violent tremor ran through the airframe, rattling instruments, and making Dr. Morrison grab onto Captain Ross's seat for support. What was that? Miller asked, alarm rising in his voice. Ethan scanned the panel. Just turbulence, atmospheric disturbance. It happens. Are you sure? I'm sure, Ethan said. But his gaze stayed on the hydraulic gauges. The pressure had dropped another notch. They were running out of time faster than he had calculated. Miller started to pull back on the yoke, instinct taking over. Ethan reached out and placed his hand over Miller's. Don't. If you pull back now, you'll stall us. Just ride it out. Trust the plane. Miller's hand trembled. For a moment, Ethan thought the younger pilot might ignore him. Then Miller forced himself to relax, keeping the yoke steady. The turbulence passed. The plane leveled out. Good, Ethan said. That's exactly right. Miller let out a shaky breath. I've never been this scared in my life. Fear's not the problem, Ethan said. Panic is. You're doing fine. But even as he said it, Ethan felt his own fear coiling tighter in his chest. He had done this before, flown damaged aircraft, brought them home against impossible odds. But he had always been alone in the cockpit. It had always been just him and the machine and the sky. Now there were 195 people depending on him, and one of them was waiting for him at home, believing he would keep his promise. He pushed the thought down and focused on the instruments. In the cabin, things were deteriorating. Claire moved through the rows, trying to maintain order, but the calm she had projected earlier was starting to crack. Passengers had their phones out, some recording video, others texting loved ones. A woman in row 12 was crying openly. A man in row 20 demanded to speak to whoever was in charge. Marcus Webb stood up from his seat and moved to the front of the cabin. He raised his voice just enough to be heard. "Everyone needs to calm down. I know you're scared. I'm scared too. But the people up front know what they're doing. The best thing we can do right now is stay quiet and let them work." A man in his 40s, reeking of alcohol, pushed out of his seat and stumbled into the aisle. His face was flushed, his words slurred. "Who the hell are you to tell us to calm down? You don't know what you're talking about. We're all going to die because they let some random guy into the cockpit." Marcus stepped toward him, his posture shifting into something harder. "Sit down." The drunk man jabbed a finger at Marcus. "I want to talk to the real pilot, not some faker who—" Claire appeared between them. "Sir, you need to return to your seat immediately." "I'm not sitting down until someone tells me what's really going on." His voice carried through the entire cabin. Other passengers turned to look. The panic that had been simmering under the surface began to boil over. Someone shouted from the back. A child started crying. Dr. Morrison appeared from the cockpit, her medical training giving her automatic authority. She moved to the drunk man and spoke in a calm, clinical tone. "Sir, I'm a doctor. I've just examined the captain. He's had a stroke and cannot fly this aircraft. The man helping us right now is a trained military pilot. If you continue to cause a disturbance, you are putting everyone on this plane in greater danger. Do you understand?" The drunk man stared at her, his mouth working soundlessly. Then he sank back into his seat, his bravado deflating. Dr. Morrison looked around the cabin, making eye contact with as many passengers as she could. "I know you're frightened," she said clearly. "But we have someone up there who knows what he's doing. The best thing you can do for yourselves and for each other is stay calm and follow instructions. We are going to get through this." The cabin quieted slightly, not silent, but manageable. Claire gave Dr. Morrison a grateful nod and returned to the cockpit. "How bad is it out there?" Ethan asked. "It's holding," Claire said. "Barely." Ethan turned back to the instruments. "Then we need to move faster." He leaned closer to Miller. "I need you to transfer primary control to me." Miller's head snapped around. "What?" "I need to take the yoke," Ethan said. "You've done great, but we're about to start the final approach, and I've done this before." "You haven't." Miller's face went pale. "I can't just hand over control. I'm the first officer. I'm responsible for this aircraft." "And I'm telling you that the best way to fulfill that responsibility is to let me help you," Ethan said. His voice was firm but not unkind. "This isn't about ego or protocol. This is about getting everyone home alive." Miller looked at the instruments, then at Captain Ross, slumped in the other seat, then back at Ethan. The fear in his expression was raw and undeniable. Finally, he nodded. "Okay," he said. "What do I do?" "You keep monitoring the instruments," Ethan said. "Call out anything I need to know. Be my second set of eyes. Can you do that?" Miller swallowed hard. "Yeah, I can do that." Ethan shifted forward and took hold of the yoke. The moment his hands wrapped around it, muscle memory kicked in. The feel of it was different from an F-16 stick, heavier and less responsive. But the principle was the same. He was in control now. The plane was his to command. Claire watched from the doorway. "Are you sure about this?" Ethan didn't look at her. His focus was on the horizon, on the instruments, on the slow crawl of numbers that would tell him whether they lived or died. "I'm sure." He eased the yoke forward, adjusting the descent angle. The plane responded, sluggish but obedient. He felt the resistance in the controls, the way the hydraulics were fighting him, barely holding together. Shannon Tower came back on the radio. 447, you are 70 miles out. Begin your descent to flight level 250. Winds are light. Visibility is good. You'll have a clear approach." Ethan keyed the mic. "Copy, Shannon. Descending to 250. He brought the nose down another degree. The altimeter began to unwind. 37,000 feet. 36,000. 35. The plane shook again, a long, rolling vibration that rattled through the floor. Hydraulic pressure just dropped again, Miller said. We're down to 15% on System 1. System 2 is at 10. Ethan's jaw set. They were losing it faster than he had hoped. How much longer can we maintain control? Miller checked the readouts. Maybe 20 minutes. Maybe less. 20 minutes. Shannon was still roughly 35 minutes out at their current speed. The math didn't work. Ethan's mind raced, calculating alternatives, running through scenarios. They could increase their descent rate, get down faster, but that would put more strain on the hydraulics. There was no good option, only less bad ones. Ethan made his choice. We're going to have to come in faster and steeper than normal. It's going to be rough, but it's the only way. Miller's voice cracked. How rough? Rough enough that everyone needs to be strapped in tight. Claire was already moving. She stepped back into the cabin and raised her voice. Everyone listen to me. We are beginning our descent. I need all of you to return to your seats immediately. Fasten your seatbelts as tight as they will go. Put your heads down and brace. Do it now. Passengers scrambled to comply. The cabin filled with the sound of clicking seatbelts and shuffling bodies. A few people were praying. Others sat in silence, white-knuckled and staring straight ahead. An elderly British couple in row 15 held hands, their faces calm and resigned. Back in the cockpit, Ethan adjusted the throttle and increased the descent rate. The nose tipped forward. The airspeed climbed. The altimeter spun faster. 25,000 feet. 20,000. 15. Hydraulic pressure at 8%, Miller said. His voice was steady now, focused. Fear was still there, but it had been pushed aside by something stronger. Discipline. Training. Ethan's hands moved over the controls with practiced precision. He had done this 1,000 times in his mind, in simulators, in the sky over deserts and oceans and mountains. The specifics were different, but the principle was the same. Stay calm. Trust your training. Fly the plane. The radio crackled. 447 Shannon Tower. You are 20 miles out. We have you on radar. Maintain current heading. You are cleared for emergency landing on runway 10. Copy, Shannon. 20 miles out. Ethan could see lights now, faint and distant, glowing against the darkness. Ireland. The coastline. Somewhere down there, people were waiting with fire trucks and ambulances and prayers. Hydraulic pressure at 5%. We're going to lose it, Miller said. Not yet, Ethan said. Just hold on a little longer. The plane bucked hard, a sudden violent jolt that threw Dr. Morrison against the bulkhead. She caught herself and steadied Captain Ross, who groaned softly. Ethan fought the yoke, forcing the nose back down, keeping them on course. 4%, Miller said. Ethan didn't respond. His entire focus was on the lights ahead, growing larger, brighter. The runway was out there. He just had to reach it. 3%. The plane was shaking now, a continuous tremor that rattled teeth and blurred vision. Sweat ran down his face. In his mind, he saw Emma's face, heard her voice. Daddy, are you coming home? 2%. Shannon Tower, we are on final approach, Ethan said into the radio. His voice was calm, controlled. Nothing in it betrayed the fear clawing at his insides. Copy. 447. You are cleared to land. Emergency services are standing by. Ethan could see the runway now, a long strip of lights cutting through the darkness. It looked impossibly small, impossibly far away. He adjusted the descent angle, felt the plane resist, forced it down anyway. 1%, Miller said quietly. I know, Ethan said. The runway rushed up to meet them. 500 feet. 400. 300. The plane was screaming. every rivet and bolt and weld straining against forces it was never designed to handle. 200 feet. The hydraulic pressure gauge hit 0. "We just lost everything," Miller said. The controls went slack, lifeless. The plane was a glider now, a massive metal tube falling out of the sky, with no way to steer except the engines. "I'm going to use differential thrust," Ethan said. "Increase power on one engine to turn, decrease on the other. It's going to be rough." Miller stared at him. "You can't land a commercial jet like that." Ethan's gaze never left the runway. "Watch me." He adjusted the throttle on the right engine, felt the plane yaw slightly to the left. He corrected with the left engine. The plane wobbled, fighting him, but it turned. He was flying it the way he had flown damaged fighters, trusting instinct and feel over instruments and automation. 100 feet. The runway filled the windscreen. Ethan pulled back on the throttle, killing speed, letting gravity take over. The plane dropped, 50 feet. In the cabin, Claire braced herself against a seat. Passengers screamed. Someone was reciting the Lord's Prayer. The elderly British couple squeezed each other's hands tighter. 20 feet. Ethan whispered, "Come on. Come on." 10 feet. The wheels hit the runway. The impact jarred through the entire aircraft, a bone-rattling thud that threw passengers against their seatbelts and sent overhead bins rattling. The front landing gear hit first, then the rear, and the plane bounced once before slamming back down onto the tarmac. Metal screamed. The fuselage shook violently. They were on the ground, but they were moving too fast, far too fast. The runway stretched ahead, lit by emergency lights, and Ethan knew with cold certainty that they weren't going to stop in time. "We don't have brakes," Miller said. "We're not going to stop." "Shannon, we need the sand arrestor," Ethan said into the radio. "Where is it?" The controller's response came back immediately. 447, the sand bed is 3,000 feet down the runway on your right. There will be guide lights directing you. Turn into it when you see the markers. Ethan scanned the runway ahead. In the darkness, he could just make out a series of red lights offset to the right. The sand bed. It was designed as a last resort for planes that couldn't stop. A strip of specially engineered sand that would create massive drag and bring an aircraft to a halt. "Hold on," Ethan said to Miller. Then he raised his voice. "Tell Claire to brace everyone. This is going to be rough." Dr. Morrison disappeared through the cockpit door. Seconds later, Claire's voice rang out through the cabin. "Brace positions now. Heads down. Do not lift your heads until we have stopped moving." Ethan adjusted the throttle, increasing power to the left engine while cutting the right. The plane began to veer right, sluggish and unwilling. He pushed harder, demanding more from engines that were never meant to be used for steering. The nose swung slowly toward the red lights. The runway blurred beneath them. Ethan could see the sand bed now, a darker strip against the concrete, positioned at an angle to catch planes that overshot. He cut power to both engines completely, feeling the plane slow slightly, but nowhere near enough. "We're not going to make the turn," Miller said. "Yes, we are," Ethan said. He maxed out the left engine one more time, felt the plane shudder and twist. The nose came around, pointing directly at the sand bed. Then he killed the engines entirely and let physics take over. The front wheels hit the sand, and the world exploded into noise. The deceleration was instant and brutal, like hitting a wall made of concrete. The plane lurched forward, throwing everyone against their restraints. In the cabin, passengers screamed. Metal groaned. Ethan braced himself against the instrument panel as the cockpit pitched forward. Beside him, Miller was thrown against his harness, gasping. The plane skewed sideways, the fuselage twisting as the sand grabbed unevenly at the wheels. For one terrible moment, Ethan thought they were going to flip. Then the resistance evened out and the plane straightened. They slowed. Slower. Slower. And then they stopped. The silence was deafening. For several seconds, no one moved, No one spoke. Ethan's hands were still locked on the yoke, knuckles white, tendons standing out like cables. He forced himself to breathe, to let go, to look around. Miller was staring straight ahead, his face bloodless. "We're down," he said, as if he couldn't quite believe it. "We're actually down." Ethan leaned back in the jump seat. His entire body was shaking. Adrenaline dumped through his system, leaving him weak and hollow. Behind him, Dr. Morrison let out a long breath. That was the single most terrifying experience of my life. Ethan turned to look at her. "How's the captain?" She checked Captain Ross's pulse, his breathing. "Still stable. He needs a hospital, but he's going to be okay." Through the cockpit door, Ethan could hear the cabin erupting. People were crying, shouting, laughing. The sound was chaotic and joyful, and relieved all at once. Miller unbuckled his harness with trembling hands. He turned to Ethan. "You just saved 195 lives." Ethan shook his head. "We saved them. You kept us in the air when it mattered." Miller reached out and gripped Ethan's shoulder. "Thank you." The cockpit door opened fully, and Claire stepped inside. Her professional composure had cracked. Tears streaked her face, though her expression remained controlled. She looked at Ethan for a long moment, then nodded once. "You did it," she said quietly. Ethan stood up on legs that felt like water. "We all did." Outside the windows, emergency vehicles were converging on the plane, their lights painting the darkness in flashes of red and white. Firefighters in protective gear surrounded the aircraft. Paramedics wheeled gurneys across the tarmac. The rear door opened, and the emergency slides deployed with a hiss of compressed air. Claire moved back into the cabin to begin the evacuation. Ethan followed her. Passengers were standing now, gathering their belongings, helping each other toward the exits. Many were still crying. Some were on their phones, calling loved ones. Dr. Morrison went to Captain Ross, coordinating with the paramedics who had boarded to stabilize him for transport. Marcus Webb stood near the front, directing traffic, making sure the elderly and families with children got out first. When he saw Ethan, he crossed the aisle and extended his hand. "Hell of a job," Marcus said. "I mean that." Ethan shook his hand. "Thanks for backing me up." Marcus smiled grimly. "I'm a journalist. I'm going to write about this. Fair warning." "Leave my name out of it," Ethan said. Marcus studied him. "Too late for that, friend. The whole internet already knows who you are." Ethan moved past Marcus toward the exit, but passengers kept stopping him. A young mother with a baby pressed his hand and whispered, "Thank you." An older man clapped him on the shoulder and said, "You're a hero, son." The elderly British couple smiled at him through their tears. "We're going to see our grandson," the woman said, "because of you." Ethan felt something break inside his chest. He nodded, unable to speak, and kept moving. The drunk man from earlier was slumped in his seat, sober now and pale. When Ethan passed, the man looked up. "I'm sorry," he said, "for what I said. I was scared." Ethan stopped. "It's okay. We all were." At the exit, Claire stood by the door, helping people onto the slide. When she saw Ethan approaching, she stepped aside. "You should go first." Ethan shook his head. "You're the senior crew. This is your plane." Claire's expression softened. "Not anymore, it's not." She gestured for him to go. Ethan stepped to the doorway and looked down at the slide, the ground below, the emergency workers waiting. Then he sat down and pushed off. The slide was fast and steep. He hit the ground and stumbled, caught himself, and walked away from the plane. The night air was cold and damp, tasting of ocean salt and jet fuel. He kept walking until he was clear of the emergency vehicles, then stopped and turned to look back. The plane sat half buried in the sand bed, listing slightly to one side, its engines silent and dark. Debris was scattered around it. Emergency crews swarmed over it. and down the slides came passengers, one after another, stumbling onto Irish soil and into the arms of waiting medics. Ethan watched them and thought about Emma, about the promise he had made and broken, about the person he had tried to stop being and the person he had just become again, if only for a few hours. A voice behind him said, "You look like you could use a minute." He turned. Claire stood a few feet away, her arms wrapped around herself against the cold. The professional mask was completely gone now. She looked exhausted and raw and human. "Are you okay?" she asked. Ethan wasn't sure how to answer that. "I don't know." Claire moved to stand beside him, both of them watching the evacuation continue. After a moment, she spoke again. "I didn't trust you. Not at first. Even after Marcus vouched for you. Even after you answered all the questions correctly. I thought you might be lying, or delusional, or dangerous." "I know," Ethan said. "But you weren't. You were exactly who you said you were." She turned to look at him. "Why didn't you want to help at first? When the captain made the announcement, you didn't stand up right away. I saw you. You were thinking about it." Ethan was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I have a daughter. She's 7. Her name is Emma. 3 years ago, I promised her I was done flying, done taking risks, that I would always come home." Claire nodded slowly. "But you stood up anyway. Because if I didn't, I wouldn't have been coming home at all." Ethan looked down at his hands. They had stopped shaking. "I spent 12 years flying missions where every takeoff could have been the last time I saw my kid. I walked away from that because I didn't want her growing up afraid every time I left the house. And tonight, I did the one thing I swore I wouldn't do." Claire was quiet. Then she said, "Your daughter is going to hear about this. Someone on that plane recorded video. It's probably already online. She's going to know what you did." Ethan felt his throat tighten. "Yeah. And when she finds out, she's going to know her father is someone who keeps his promises." Claire's voice was soft but firm. "You promised her you'd come home. And you did. You just made sure 188 other people could make the same promise to their families." Ethan didn't respond. He couldn't. Behind them, the last of the passengers were sliding down to safety. Emergency crews were beginning to secure the aircraft. Somewhere in the distance, ambulances were pulling away, carrying Captain Ross and a few passengers who needed medical attention. Claire touched his arm lightly. "Thank you, Ethan, for trusting us, for letting me trust you." She walked away, back toward the other crew members who were being gathered for debriefing. Ethan stood alone in the cold Irish night and pulled out his phone. He had turned it off before takeoff, airline policy. Now he powered it on and waited for it to connect. 12 missed calls, 23 text messages, all from Mrs. Kowalski. He dialed her number. She answered on the first ring. "Ethan. Oh my God. Are you okay? I saw the news. I saw what happened. Emma doesn't know. I didn't want to wake her." Ethan closed his eyes. "I'm fine. Everyone's fine. Is Emma asleep?" "Yes. She went down at 8 like always." "Ethan, they're saying you landed the plane. They're saying you saved everyone." "I need you to do me a favor," Ethan said. "Don't tell Emma about any of this. Not yet. Let me tell her when I get home." Mrs. Kowalski's voice softened. "Of course. When will you be back?" "I don't know. Soon. There's going to be debriefing, probably some interviews. But I'll be back as soon as I can. She'll be so proud of you." He ended the call and stood in the darkness, watching the emergency lights flash across the broken plane. In a few hours, the sun would rise over Ireland. In a few days, he would be home. And he would have to look his daughter in the eye and explain why her father was all over the news for doing the one thing he had promised never to do again. But that was a problem for later. Right now, he was just grateful to be alive.